All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to our first California Politics Roundtable discussion. That gets applause, guys. Imagine if we get ours, your flowers now set. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet in the past, my name is Dan Schnur, and I'm the director of the Jess Unruh Institute of Politics here at USC. And we have sponsored roundtable discussions with the Political Student Assembly for the last couple of years. But we've normally done them as evening programs and a round table. So the first thing that we'd ask you to do with us, for today's conversation, is please imagine a round table here in this open spot in the middle of the room. As Jenny D., who you'll meet in just a second, who's the director of the Political Student Assembly, noted, that even though there's not physically a round table, we want this, unlike many of our Unruh Institute programs, to be much more of a conversation. For those of you who've attended our Students Talk Back lunches in the past, and we'll continue to do those every other week throughout the semester, we generally set up a panel of a number of people who sit up here, and myself and a moderator will ask them questions for 35, 40 minutes, and then leave a little bit of time at the end for questions from the students who decided to attend. I think what the PSA leadership, to their credit, think makes sense to do as well, and we'll be alternating all semester long, like I said, is to make this much more of a conversation. And while we have two very, very smart, very, very insightful guests who I'll introduce in just a moment, we really do, rather than just having us old folk dominate the discussion, is make it a conversation, and let's leave as much time over the course of the hour for all of you to weigh in with your questions for our guest experts. Today's conversation is, I think you know, is centering on the Republican presidential primary. And we decided to focus today's conversation on the Republicans because, as most of you know, last week they had their most recent presidential debate, a 3-hour debate-a-thon, I guess you could call it, on CNN. And for those of you who were able to join us over at Annenberg for that viewing, we appreciated your being there with us. And we'll do a similar conversation like this one for the Democrats in a few weeks, right after they have their first debate. So that doesn't mean that conversations about Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are forbidden today, but it does mean that we're going to concentrate, certainly not exclusively, but primarily on the Republican field coming out of the debate and the news that's occurred since then. So our two guests today, we're very, very lucky. We have two of the most knowledgeable people in California politics to help lead us through the conversation. Sitting immediately to my left is our friend Matt Klink. Matt's been an Unruh Institute fellow with us for many years. And Matt is also known as one of the most respected Republican political consultants and analysts, not just here in LA, not just in California, but around the country. Matt, thanks so much for coming back. We're happy to have you. Thank you. And sitting next to Matt is Seema Mehta. Seema is a senior political reporter for the Los Angeles Times. She's covering the presidential campaign, and we're actually very lucky because the odds were just as good that she might have been in Des Moines, Iowa, or Manchester, New Hampshire today, but because she's in Los Angeles, she's been able to join us. Prior to covering this race, Seema covered both the 2012 and 2008 presidential campaigns for the Times, as well as mayoral, gubernatorial, and Senate races here in Los Angeles and in California. She's one of the most respected political reporters, again, not just in the state, but in the country. We're very happy to have her here. Seema, thanks so much for coming back. Let it be known that you both got more applause than our first political roundtable did, so good for the both of you. So here's where we shift into a different type of format. I'm going to sit down and shut up mercifully. You don't have to applaud for that. But I'm going to turn over the microphones in just a moment to Jenny D., who I mentioned earlier, who's the director of the Political Student Assembly, and Sean Rent, who's the assistant director. And at this point, rather than doing opening statements, rather than having a moderated discussion, we're simply going to turn this over to questions. And Jenny and Sean are going to ask the first questions of our panelists. And at that point, we'd like as many of you to weigh in as possible. We'll ask you to raise your hand, and Jenny and or Sean will come to you with a microphone so that our guests and everybody else in the audience will be able to hear you. But from this point forward, we want this to be your conversation. And Seema and Matt, and to a lesser extent me, will do our best to answer your questions. But right now, the floor belongs to you. So Jenny, Sean, you're on.
Hi, thank you, Dan. So our first question for the two of you is, so we're a little over a year out from the actual election, and things for us at least seem to be pretty different from our perspective, from the students' perspective, seem to be a little bit different than maybe what they're usually like. Where are campaigns usually at in terms of goals and what they're trying to accomplish a little bit over a year at, and how is this particular campaign and election different?
I think this campaign it's sort of upended all political conventional wisdom. What I thought I knew about campaigns is apparently wrong, according to what has happened with this campaign, with the summer of Donald Trump, with the rise of the outsiders, with the three top people in the polls never being held elected office before. So in that way, the candidates are very different. Additionally, but I think that the things that are going on, beneath the scenes, the fundraising, the organizing in states like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, that is happening to different degrees among different candidates. And actually, even though we are, more than a year out from the general election, we are maybe 4.5 months out from the Iowa caucuses. And so that organizing that's taking place it's so important, and it's also so subtle, and we don't think about it in California, but in places like that, you really have to get your team leader in each of your precincts, and they have to talk about you the night of the caucuses. So that organization is taking place as well right now.
So to add to that, under normal circumstances in a multi-candidate primary, but with certainly less than, was it 15 now, the goal would be for a candidate to solidify the base, to build name identification, and to raise money. Now the challenge with all that is that you have someone who entered the race a couple months ago, Donald Trump, who is more celebrity than he is politician. And for Donald, so there are Donald Trump's goals, and then there's goals for everybody else. Donald Trump's goals, it's all about keeping his name identification high. He won't talk specifics on anything. I mean, Kimberly Strassel wrote a great article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago where she talked about, Donald Trump's response to any question he doesn't know the answer to is whatever. I can't see Marco Rubio, Carly Fiorina, or any other candidate being allowed to get away with that. But so there's the Donald rule, and then there's everybody else. Everybody else is trying to fit into what campaigns traditionally do. The problem was that there are so many different candidates involved right now. They're competing for almost their base within the base, if that makes any sense. So I think right now the goal for everybody to be a credible candidate is double digits. Anybody who has above 10 points, maybe if you're 9, we'll give it a plus minus in either direction. So if you're at 10 or above, you're a legitimate candidate. If you're 10 or below, you're probably closer to being gone than you are, gone by Iowa and New Hampshire than you are to sticking around for the long haul.
Anybody have any questions in response?
I think we forgot to mention, so Jenny and I will be walking around with microphones, and if you want to speak or ask a question, just put up your hand and we'll come up to you.
What is the difference between, I know you said that if a candidate is below 9–10% right now, they're probably going to be out. We saw Walker being the first to drop out actually suspend. Why do you think that candidates who pretty much know they're going to lose stay in the race instead of just dropping out and saving their money and their time and their energy? Is there a strategy behind that?
I mean, I think it is pretty, it's so early. It really is so early, and I think we're going to see a number of front runners between now and February. And if you look at the people who are at the top of the polls right now, or the people who are at the bottom of the polls right now, 4 years ago, they ended up winning, Rick Santorum. Nobody thought he had a chance. He was driving around in a pickup truck in Iowa, visiting different counties. Nobody was covering him. He was maybe 1 or 2% in the polls. He ended up winning the Iowa caucuses. So it's so very early. And also, for some of these people, even if they perhaps know that they're not going to be president, having the attention of being a presidential candidate can translate into a TV show on Fox News, into book sales, into speaking opportunities. So they get to stay in the limelight. They're out, some of them, such as Rick Santorum, are out of elected office, and I don't know what he would be doing if he wasn't running for president, because he seems to enjoy it. So I think there are other reasons, there are other benefits, even if you perhaps know that you're not going to win the nomination.
You want to take a stab at that, or you want to just? So, yeah, exactly. And I think that also you have to remember that, generally speaking, anyone, and this is men, women, running for office, especially for President of the United States, they have a massive ego. And I believe, shocker, right, there's my master of the obvious statement of the day. I don't think that anybody, well, maybe with the exception of one or two candidates, Governor Gilmore from Virginia being one, or maybe Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, I don't think that anybody gets into a presidential race knowing that they're going to lose. I think that they all think, I mean, look, the seamless example of Rick Santorum, who ended up winning, what, 11 states in 2012?
He was the last man standing.
Yeah, I mean, that's somebody who came
Never
from
really
nowhere, who has zero shot of ever being president of the United States. He stuck around for a long time. So I think that each of these candidates says, I just need one moment, and if I can catch fire, a la Carly Fiorina, I can take off, and then who knows what's gonna happen. So they're all waiting for that one moment where they have their moment in the sun, that spark is lit, and then they're in the elite group, and they're through at least Super Tuesday in March. So.
And before we get to any other questions, can you introduce yourselves before you ask a question? So you just name, major, year.
Hello, my name is Logan Dallas.
Please come.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you're good.
My name's Logan Dallas. I'm a sophomore international relations major here at USC. My question is kind of in the opposite direction of Moment in the Sun. You mentioned summer of Donald Trump and how his lack of particulars when he's talking about different issues. So I wanted to ask, in your opinions, what will be or what could be the downfall of his campaign, and where, like, do you see him ever losing support at some point in time?
Well, we've already seen an erosion of support. He's lost 4 points since last week, at least according to the initial polls. But I think what you saw, more importantly than just losing points, you saw the first chink in his armor inflicted by another candidate, and that was Carly Fiorina's brutal response to him with, 10 words about the look question. So I think that opened up the floodgates. And look, Donald Trump is 1 or 2 poorly constructed statements away from torpedoing his own campaign. Because again, you can only say, it's gonna be great and it's gonna be huge times. Or people say, all right, where's the there? I mean, look at that, during the last debate for a 40-minute period of time, when there was substantive conversation about foreign relations, Donald Trump was nowhere to be found. That's a pretty telling, I mean, that's, what was that, a 10th of the CNN debate in terms of overall running time, because it was so long? I'm being a little facetious, but, I mean, Donald Trump he shrunk, and he became, when Donald Trump ceases to be larger than life, is when his candidacy will begin to crater quickly.
And I totally agree that I think this past debate we might be seeing the beginning of the end. But what I think was fascinating about him is that he has said a lot of things that if other candidates had said them, like, they could not have gotten away with. The Megyn Kelly, I mean, that was pretty horrific. The statements about John McCain, about veterans, he's gotten away with saying a lot of things, and I don't know if it's because of the force of his personality or what, that a lot of other candidates can get away with. The other thing is he has this appeal, and I would compare it a little bit to Arnold Schwarzenegger, although I think Schwarzenegger was more substantive than Donald Trump. But he has this celebrity appeal that draws people to him. Like, I was at the Iowa State Fair with him in the middle of August, and it was like a movie premiere with, like, people cheering just to touch his shoulder or to get a selfie with him, and it was like a dangerous crush of people just following him, like just trying to get like a glimpse of him. And that you don't see that with other candidates. I mean, Hillary was there the same day. She had some of that, but she didn't have as much of it. So I wonder how much that outweighs his the mistakes he's making, or if that, and how long he can sustain that, or whether people will get sick of it because, as you said, he's not really talking about actual policy.
I actually have a question. Do you think there's anything that the Republican candidates or politicians in general can learn from Donald Trump?
I think that people are angry. I mean, I think what people are responding to is that they're sick of DC, they're sick of gridlock, they're sick of politicians who they believe are conservative. I'm talking about Republican voters, who then go to DC and become part of the machine. I mean, you see this with Trump, but you also see it with Carly Fiorina and with Ben Carson. There's this restive mood among voters that is looking for outsiders because they're so sick of the status quo.
No, exactly, I'd echo that. There's a real disdain for Washington, D.C. There is a deep distrust of politicians. I mean, even look at Gallup. Gallup said that 75% of Americans believe there's widespread corruption in Washington, D.C. So Donald Trump, and to a lesser extent on the other side of the aisle, Bernie Sanders, Although I don't know how someone who's a senator can be run as an outsider like that, because he's been in Washington for so long. But the public at large is very disillusioned with Washington DC, and it's both parties. It's not the Republican Party, it's not the Democratic Party, it's both parties. And that's a huge factor, I think, for next November.
My name is Katrina Chevino. I'm a junior studying international relations. I was wondering how much does television shows like Veep or House of Cards influence this notion of corruption? Like, how does Hollywood and like news media in New York or Atlanta and like that type of genre affect the people's perceptions on polls and?
Sure. Well, I guess, no, that's a fascinating look. I mean, are those shows, you know, portraying something that's already there and making it a little bit more extreme? Or are they making it up because they think that that's what the public believes? I have to believe that it's probably more of the former than the latter. I mean, it is flat out wrong that someone can go to Washington, D.C., of moderate economic means and leave after 8 years or 16 years in the United States Senate and leave a multimillionaire. How does that happen when you're making what a senator makes? I mean, there should not be rapid rise of property values in Washington, D.C. because the money's flowing into Washington. I mean, shining city on a hill is becoming, you know, everybody else is sucking at the leftovers from Washington, D.C., and people are really frustrated with that. So I think that these shows, they're over-exaggerating something that's already there, but it's something that's clearly gotten worse. And it's not the Republican Party, it's both parties. There's a certain class of people that never lose. And that's the Washington elites, and that's the frustration I think you're seeing in 2016.
Hi, my name is Amira Perriman. I'm a senior studying international relations here. And we've kind of talked about some of the factors that have built into a rise in a non-traditional Republican Party. The disillusionment with the Washington elites, the different TV shows that are on air that kind of represent that. Are there any more factors you would say are important in understanding the rise of a Donald Trump or Ben Carson or Carly Frio? Sorry, I don't know if that's the last name.
I mean, I think voter mood is, I think that really tells the biggest part of the story, and I don't have the poll numbers in front of me, I'm sorry, but there was a recent poll that talked about the large segment of the electorate who could think about electing somebody who's never held political office before, and the numbers were pretty large, and as I believe Mr. Schnur has pointed out in one of my stories, we haven't elected a president who didn't have elected experience since, since and he had to win a war to do it. So, I mean, the fact that this is a viable option for people, I think, speaks to just how much frustration there is among voters.
And also, nothing's getting done in Washington, D.C. I mean, it doesn't matter who holds power. Nothing's happening. Our big problems are not being solved. And it's in part because neither party is working well with the other party. The system's broken, and the entrenched politicians that are in Washington, D.C., again, not party specific, are the problem. And I think that the problem, though, is that, what is that old statement, everybody hates Congress, but everybody loves their congressperson. The problem with that is that we don't vote, like nationwide polls for president. Who cares? They're irrelevant. We don't elect our president that way. Other than at, an interesting temperature on any given day, what's important is to look at where the polls lie in any specific state, because that's how we're ultimately going to elect our president. But the mood of the country is pretty nasty and negative right now, and that's across the board.
Hi, my name's Ida. I'm a philosophy and international relations major. My question is, we've been hearing a lot about how it's a negative mood and how you mentioned that the system's broken. There needs to be systemic change. Do you think then that would require someone like an outsider to come, even though these outsiders, the ones we've been mentioning, likely don't have that experience? Or what do you think is something that would help if this is a systemic issue?
I mean, I don't know that I believe that it's a systemic issue. I think in terms of the nomination, and maybe everything I know about politics is wrong, but I suspect after we go through the next couple months, it'll turn more into what a traditional Republican primary looks like, where you have an establishment candidate battling a more conservative, perhaps more socially conservative, or more libertarian candidate. So I think if there is much talk about how angry people are I don't know, I'd be really shocked if we see a President Trump or a President Fiorina, but it could happen.
I would definitely agree. I think that right now it's very easy to rail against the
Right.
machine, so to speak, because it doesn't really matter. This is kind of like your summer vacation. It's kind of what you can do for fun. When we start getting into, when people start taking real votes that matter, I think that that the voters are gonna be looking for something much more specific. Can this person lead? I mean, look, I don't think that, for running for president, people are looking for, do they have leadership abilities? Can they set an agenda? Can they bring people to them and get things done? If you're running for a Senate, they want to know, can you play well in the sandbox and how do you play with other people? That's not what I think people want for president. So I think that domestic policy, for Republicans especially, taxes and overregulation are going to be important. National defense is probably going to be more of an issue in 2016 than it certainly has been since the 2004 election. That's a very good thing for Republicans, at least right now, given the space and time between Bush leaving office and the debacle that's happened in the Middle East under President Obama. The only challenge for the Republicans is how they manage the social issues, but that's always a challenge for Republicans. I mean, the reality ultimately, at the end of the day, there are 9 states that are going to determine the next president of the United States, and everybody else is just, we're already boxed in California.
Well, just to add something to that, also, I think you're totally right that right now people are just expressing their anger, but when it comes to February and you're thinking about, okay, if you think Hillary Clinton's a likely Democratic nominee, who is the best person to stand on that stage next to her? When you're making that calculus in your head or that analysis in your head, I think that you might come to a different answer than you're coming to right now when you're just really expressing your anger. And it's sort of, I think somebody else, I'm not sure who compared it, like this is like, right now it's sort of like the guy you went to the prom with who was like fun and like pissed off your parents and maybe a little bit dangerous. And in February you're gonna be thinking about the guy you want to marry, who you want to have kids with, who you could settle down and be a responsible person. So it's just like 2 different questions.
I'm Brianna, I'm a sophomore studying political science. So back to about what the GOP candidates maybe can look to in Donald Trump. Do you think some of them are looking at Donald Trump and his kind of outrageous comments and thinking that maybe they can get away with the same type of thing and maybe even benefit from them? I'm thinking about like Ben Carson's comment on a Muslim shouldn't be elected president.
Well, Scott Walker tried to do this on immigration and it clearly did not work out very well for him. And Ben Carson, I think we're still in the middle of seeing how that plays out. I think the other lessons that some of the candidates have learned, like some of them were just sort of ignoring Trump in the beginning, figuring he was just like, going to fall away. But Jeb in particular, they've gotten more aggressive, and then Perry did that earlier, obviously, but that didn't work as well. So I do think he's affected the way the other candidates are behaving.
I agree.
Just going off that question, I'm Dan, a junior studying business. Among all the political inquiry comments that Donald Trump has made, it seems to me, at least, some of the comments made him more popular because they appeal to certain popular groups, because that's what they want to hear. But the most recent comment obviously hurt him really badly in the poll. And can you guys talk about why, for the comments of same nature, that can lead to different results?
I think the McCain comment, while many veterans found it, sort of repulsive, John McCain is not a popular figure in the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. He's, viewed as Republican in name only. He gets flack for cooperating with Democrats when he does. He was, he championed comprehensive immigration reform at one point. So making fun of John McCain is not necessarily going to get you in trouble with part of the Republican Party electorate. The Carly thing, I think, she's the only woman on that stage at that debate, and the way she responded, I think her answer was just very crisp. It was very clean. She didn't get down in the mud with him. She just said very simply, I think women knew exactly what you meant, and left it at that. And then he was like, he was a little shaken, and then he sort of stumbling, and you don't often see him stumbling, like the look on his face, when he was like, oh, I think she's a very beautiful woman, I think she has a beautiful face. So I think it was the way, the interaction between the two of them at that moment, that it just, I think, just worked really well for her, not so well for him.
There's also, though, I have to admit, there's a certain element in the Republican Party, and I think certainly among independents and perhaps among Democrats as well, that we get so caught up in trying to say, or in this case lately, not say what's politically incorrect, that I think that at least for some of Donald Trump's statements, doesn't mean I endorse what he says, but it's almost like a breath of fresh air that somebody finally said what needs to be said in terms of common usage. And I think to crystallize it, there was a discussion, gosh, at this point now, it's probably a month ago, when Trump and then Bush were talking about the use of the term anchor babies. And Bush, one of his few reasonably good lines, when he said he was at a press conference and he used that term. And a reporter talked about it being a pejorative and not very flattering and discriminatory, and Bush said, "Give me a better term." And the reporter then tends to roll out a 9 or 10 word sentence to describe what Bush described in 2 words. And he said, "Thanks, I'll just use my term I'm using." And by the way, and that term was negativized, that's even a word, by a reporter from the New York Times in 2006. So from the Republican perspective, we're gonna let a liberal reporter from the New York Times define what can and can't be said. That's not gonna
I
happen.
think there's one little problem with that, which is that Jeb Bush sat on the board of a group that was trying to help Republicans fix themselves, and they put out a memo basically saying Republicans stop using words like anchor babies. And he was like a signatory to that, so.
That I did not know. Whoops.
Hi, my name is David Craig. I'm a freshman biochem major, and I come from Wisconsin, where Scott Walker is obviously a very polarizing figure. And I was wondering if you could speculate as to both where his support went that caused him to drop out, but also where you think his existing support will go.
I think he had a number of problems, but part of it was due to his candidacy himself as a candidate, and part of it was the way the race changed as the months were on. Like, he made this huge splash in Iowa in January. He got all the support, but at that point he didn't have any campaign structure, so he couldn't take advantage of that support. So he was getting all this extra scrutiny, but he didn't have like sort of the structural backgrounding. So there was an imbalance there, and he made a couple stumbles in terms of foreign policy and other issues, and he also didn't take advantage of the momentum that he had early on, so people started to look elsewhere, and then donors started to look elsewhere. And when your donors leave you, that's a problem. His super PAC still had a ton of money. He was running out of money. He was canceling events. He was supposed to be speaking actually in Anaheim last week at the California Republican Party Convention, canceled very abruptly on them. And so especially once you start losing out of money, things start to go downhill. In terms of polling, I've seen, people initially thought that he could be the candidate that bridges the establishment and social conservatives. But in terms of the polling, I think you see it it's spread out among a number of candidates. Obviously, John Kasich, he's totally trying to take advantage of this. Like, within an hour after Walker dropped out, he put out a fundraising email saying, "I'm the only Midwestern governor left in the race. We'll bring our values to Washington, D.C." So he thinks he has a path there. I think people think he has some path there. And who else? There's somebody else. Oh, Christie's people. They thought they may, I don't know as much, I haven't heard as much from them, but I think they're hoping they can perhaps get some of that support. But Kasich seems like a natural, but in the polling, I think you've seen it go everywhere.
I mean, Walker's allure to the Republican Party was his ability to stick it to organized labor and stick it to him again and stick it to him again. But after you heard that, it's like Rudy Giuliani running for president in 2008. And you can only be America's mayor for so long, and then you want to know what people think about other things. And when Walker ventured into other areas, foreign policy being one of them, he couldn't pull his foot out of his mouth. So, and then what, he got 8 minutes of time in the last debate, the least of any candidate. So he was going nowhere fast, and then Tuesday, just the door closed. So, and I agree that the support is not going to go to one candidate. It's going to be probably divvied up. Kasich wants some of it, but he's going to get a little slice of it.
And also, the race changed between January and now. In January, conservatives were really looking for who's going to be our alternative to Jeb Bush. And Walker seemed to fit that bill. I mean, he had the business background, or again, the business sort of support as well as the conservative support. But now, with the summer of Trump, people are now looking for who's going to be our anti-Donald Trump, and Walker doesn't fit that bill as nicely.
This is Elon. You were kind of speaking about Donald Trump and political correctness, and Donald Trump isn't one to mince words. So do you think that is it possible that his how well he's doing, like his support, may actually in some ways be sort of a statement on how the nation is starting to view political correctness as a whole, or?
I don't think the nation as a whole, but I think the parts of the Republican Party, yes. I mean, like my in-laws are they're longtime, lifelong Republicans, and within a half an hour of visiting them, there will be some comment about like, oh my God, you just can't say anything these days. Did you hear about this latest, drama or whatever? So I think that he definitely taps that current, but I don't know that it's, I mean, on the Democratic side, you have stuff like the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a very different thing. So I don't think it's a national,
And I haven't seen any numbers on it recently, but Trump's allure is not only among Republicans. He's bringing people who probably left the Republican Party in 2006 and self-aligned with independents. He's bringing them back into the Republican Party because they're just so dissatisfied with the system. Now, and these are people that the Republicans need to win next November. So we want to keep these people in the party. But I would be very scared to think if Donald Trump would be a long-term spokesperson for the Republican Party. I think that his value right now is he's shuffled the debate up. He's forcing the candidates to be sharper on their feet. But I think that in the long run, some of his statements are just too caustic, even for conservative Republicans in the long run.
Hi, my name is Grayson Peltier. I'm a junior majoring in political science. When you look at a candidate like Donald Trump, there are two main reasons why he is succeeding, in my opinion. First being the somewhat angry rhetoric, actually pretty angry rhetoric, the lack of political correctness in his messaging. But the second is the celebrity effect. And I haven't seen any Republican candidate really have a true celebrity effect around them for at least the last few election cycles. We did see in a different way Obama have sort of celebrity ethos in his campaign strategy. I'm just curious if there's any way for a more legitimate Republican candidate to garner a celebrity effect either in the Obama way or somewhat in the Trump way, but not with the angry rhetoric, and what the best approach for that candidate would be.
I'll give it a go. So you have to earn that, and I think you do that. You earn that by being dynamic when you're out speaking to groups and other organizations and talking about what you believe in. Trump's advantage is he's been on TV for 15 years. Obama's advantage was that he was incredibly charismatic. And I think that the tragedy here is we're talking about the 2016 Republican field, and yet the inordinate amount of questions in this group, and frankly even in the CNN debate, are focusing on one person. You're looking at probably the most diverse, deepest, well-spoken, innovative Republican Party field for president in a very, very long time. You've got some really strong candidates that, believe it or not, you would never know it because you're not reading a lot about it, that have put up very substantive proposals on tax reform, on healthcare reform, on national security policy, and all of that is getting, the oxygen is getting sucked out of the room because you got some guy with swooshy hair who likes to target people and rip them apart when he doesn't agree with them, or likes to take sucker punches like Trump did against Rand Paul. So I think that from the Republican perspective, we're doing the other 14 legitimate candidates a serious disservice by spending so much time talking about someone like Donald Trump, because you could get someone like Carly Fiorina who could get that persona. You could have somebody like Marco Rubio talking about that persona, but we spend all this time saying, what do you think about what Donald Trump said? I mean, it's not from a Republican standpoint. It may make for really spicy and sexy headlines, but it's not going to do the party right in the long run. And I think the sooner that we can if we force Trump to be more specific, he's going to shrink like he did last week, and that will allow the other candidates who have a legitimate shot at being president to rise to the top.
Just the one problem with that is that we weren't really not covering Trump very much in the summer, thinking, he's going to go away, whatever. And then at some point we made a decision, like he kept rising in the polls, And it's like, how can you not cover who is right now the Republican
Oh, I agree.
frontrunner? You know, it's just, I get what you're saying, but I mean, just with the polls, with nationally and in the early states, I mean, there's no other alternative, I mean.
Yeah, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is, right? I mean, Trump is saying something that's interesting, which means to the other candidates, up your game or you're gonna get smoked by this guy. So I mean.
That's what I really wonder, what this summer is gonna mean for the other candidates, because if Trump hadn't been there, I do wonder if we would have seen a Marco Rubio, or potentially Walker, you know, winning some of it back, you know, but since Trump did suck all of the air out of the room, he denied oxygen to a lot of other candidates, and so I don't know how it's gonna all play out and who's gonna help eventually, but I think it definitely deterred some people.
Yeah, Trump's role at thinning the herd is probably a good thing for the Republican field right now, because it means that the ones that are left are gonna be the strongest, and let them fight it out, rather than having the stragglers hang on for longer, sucking up much needed airtime.
Right.
So no, he's played a valuable role.
Walker said as much when he dropped out and or suspended his campaign. He said, you know, I'm doing this and I hope others will consider doing it as well, so that, you know, an alternative to Trump can rise. I've never heard, in a dropout speech, I've never heard, you know, a candidate encourage others to drop out as well, so that's pretty funny.
Join me.
Hi, my name is Ryan Sloan. I'm a senior political science major. I actually reposted Walker's thing onto my Facebook about dropping out, and tons of people were like, well, that's actually a good idea. I like how he said that, so I like you guys point that out. So I've noticed that the two highest polling of the last poll that I checked in was Carson and Trump, which are non-career politicians. And I was wondering what your guys' take was on how well a non-career politician is really going to do in the White House if they have not built up relationships around the board throughout the House of Representatives and stuff, where you do need other people's input and, you know, advising and votes on
Well, I mean,
many things.
to offer the other side, I mean, Obama was in the Senate and his relations with the House of Representatives, or the Senate isn't very good either, so. But I do think it's a good question about, you know, if you don't have any political experience, you know, how do you go, I mean, to the highest stage, you know, to be the leader of the free world, to, you know, be in meetings with, you know, Putin and, you know, and everybody else. I mean, I think that's a big question that voters are gonna ask themselves as we move forward. And I'm trying to think of state comparisons. I mean, I think, you know, you have Schwarzenegger in California, and you have Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura had a small elected role, I think, before he was elected governor, but no, not at all. Okay. So, you know, maybe you could look at their track records. I think, you know, some would argue Schwarzenegger, you know, he had high points and low points. So maybe people can look at that as a model for what a non-elected person does when they get into office. But it's really unpredictable, and that's a question for voters, I guess.
One thing we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about too is I think that the overall mood of the country is going to play a really pivotal role, not only in who the Republicans select, because I think that, you know, right now I think you're going to find a lot of very pragmatic Republicans. After 8 years of Barack Obama, the party wants to elect someone who's going to win. And I think that we proved that we can elect. I mean, one, I don't think John McCain ever had a shot to win, because anybody who didn't have an R behind their name was going to win in 2008, and Barack Obama did a better job than Hillary Clinton did. In 2012, the party nominated Mitt Romney. Nobody was excited about it. Nobody. Conservatives weren't, moderates weren't. He was just kind of there. And he's a nice man, he's qualified. He didn't generate excitement. I think we have the opportunity from the Republican standpoint to nominate someone who is not only going to energize the base, but motivate independents to swing Republican. But on the flip side, if you look at what the Democrats have right now, Hillary Clinton is a terrible candidate. She may get better. I think the debates are going to be the best thing that ever happened to her, because she's going to have to get sharp right now. She'll have to talk about anything but her emails. But Hillary is not a very good candidate, and she certainly is not going to generate the enthusiasm levels of Barack Obama. So the Republicans are really banking on that enthusiasm factor in 2016, and they're going to get a large Republican turnout and hope the independents swing toward the Republicans.
Hello, Amira, senior international relations major. So who do you think among the Republican candidates right now can get the base vote and then swing the independents to their side in terms of not only the financial backing, but also in the pragmatic platforms that they have put forth so far?
Sure. Well, going down the line, I think Carly Fiorina has this is all potential. It doesn't mean they actually deliver on their potential. Carly has the ability to do it. Rubio has the ability to do it. I say Jeb just because he'll have so much money, but again, that ironically enough, a very conservative governor of Florida is now being questioned about his conservative credentials by some elements of the Republican Party. And that can change. Again, it's the whole pragmatism effect, but I just don't know. I don't think Ted Cruz, I don't think Carson, I don't think Trump. Kasich maybe, and I say maybe. Kasich is kind of playing this, the compassionate conservative Republican. He's kind of a big government Republican in Ohio, and frankly, we had big government Republican with Bush, and I don't think that that's, we need to cut Washington, we don't need to grow Washington. Washington is the problem, not the solution. And I think that's the message that's going to invigorate the base, and I don't know if Kasich can deliver that message.
So I think if you just take the people who are hard right social conservatives, if you take like Santorum and Huckabee out of it because they're probably not going to appeal to independents, I think most of the rest of them, depending on how they, and probably not Ted Cruz, but most of the rest of them, depending on how they talk about certain issues, I think they could appeal to independents. And then Rand Paul, he's obviously making an overt attempt to appeal to independents, to college students.
The problem with Rand Paul though in a Republican primary,
well, especially in national security.
Yeah, that's exactly. Rand Paul makes Barack Obama look like a hawk. I mean, he's a chicken hawk, but he looks like a hawk.
I think the only reason Lindsey Graham is in this race is to make fun of Rand Paul.
I agree, and Lindsey Graham is running for Secretary of Defense. So, yeah, Rand Paul's stance on national security, I think, makes him not a viable candidate.
Do you think there are any issues that the Republican candidates in particular have been avoiding talking about because they think they'll alienate their base or anything like that?
I think they tried to avoid talking about immigration until Trump pushed it to the forefront and sort of forced everybody to talk about immigration.
It's been talked about differently.
Yeah.
And I think the terms of the, which is valuable in this case. I think that right now you now have a fairly united Republican Party that any immigration reform has to involve securing the border first. And then from there, you have varying degrees of positions to to Trump's most ridiculous, being getting rid of 11 to 12 million people, which Chris Christie, in his most effective moment last Tuesday, called him on it about the logistical challenge of doing something like that. But I think that immigration has been a subject that's been discussed for quite a while in Washington, D.C., but the way in which it has been discussed has changed, and Donald Trump has played a valuable role in that.
I'm Angela. I'm also a freshman biochem major, and I had a question about Jeb Bush. So going into the Republican campaign, the campaign season, everyone thought that he was going to be a front runner. He's a Republican, Hillary Clinton. He has the pedigree, the money, the name. What happened to his campaign, and is there any way that he can revitalize his campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I've been covering him the most of all the Republican candidates, and you're totally right. Like on paper, he has every box checked. He has a ton of money. He has higher name ID than most. He has a good record in Florida. If you're a Republican voter looking for certain things, he's conservative on social issues, but he makes the establishment happy because he's not angry, and he usually doesn't use language that offends women or minorities. I mean, you see the potential. I mean, the one thing that was holding him back was his last name. Do people want another Bush the same way do people want another Clinton? But he just really has not. He stumbled on the trail. He's struggled. I mean, I'm sure his campaign has advised him on how to deal with it. He's going to be asked about his brother. He's going to be asked about the Iraq War. He's going to be asked about his father. And I know his campaign has tried to prepare him for that. And he is just really. I think it represents an internal conflict where he loves his brother. He has a hard time, even when I think he wants to criticize him. And so we saw the stumble with the question about knowing what we know now about the Iraq War. Would you still go in? And it took him 5 days to come up with his answer on that. Also, I mean, he hasn't really campaigned, I think, since for more than a decade. A lot's changed. I mean, in his gubernatorial portrait in Florida, he has a BlackBerry, and while I still carry a BlackBerry, most people do not carry a BlackBerry. So technology is different, rapid response is different. It's a different playing environment. I think he's a little rusty. But I am surprised. I thought he would be doing better, but then there's several months, and you don't want to be the front runner in the summer to deflate by the winter. So there is definitely an opportunity, and I do think as the field is winnowed, some of his natural advantages and a super PAC that has $100 million will start helping him out.
Yeah, he's a status quo candidate in an early election that was anything but status quo. I mean, look how you described him. He's the Republican Hillary Clinton. Egads. I mean, that's not where you want to be. Nobody wants to be the status quo right now. And Bush, even though he's been out of office, 8 years? 6 years, 7 years, something like that. I mean, he's still, because of his last name, he is the status quo. And Seema's right, I mean, he has been slow and not impressive. I mean, if Bush had performed like Marco Rubio with $100 million in the bank, people on the Republican side of the aisle would be turning cartwheels. But he has been unimpressive so far. Doesn't mean he can't become impressive. I mean, they're kicking the rust off, but it's just not happening as quickly as he would like. But again, $100 million, wow. Probably more than, it was more than that.
It's more than that, yeah.
So, this is more relating to a finance question because it's something that I remembered with Walker. So most of the states that have the money are primarily Democratic. So if you look at Hawaii or New York or California or Maryland or most of these states that have the money are Democrat. How can a Republican candidate say, oh, take out the money out of government, but then the states that want heavy government are the ones that have the most cash? How can you square those two?
Do you mean in terms of the residents having the most cash or the state governments having the
Or
most cash?
The states are giving the most revenue to the federal government, and those states are generally Democrats, and they want more government assistance, more welfare. So how do you square, I know what the candidates want. They say less government, but the people who have the money want more government. So how can they square that off in a campaign?
I mean, I don't remember the statistics offhand, but I thought that there were some states which are basically donor states, of which I thought California is one.
71 cents on the dollar.
While you have other smaller, poorer states who give far less than they get, and those tend to be red states. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
one of the most, my question is, one of the basis of the conservative message is to get money out of government. But then the states with the most money, who want more welfare, who want more government intervention in society, are the ones with the money. How can conservatives within the Republican Party square those two things off during the campaign?
I got it. I think I got it. We'll see. Well, look, from a purely political standpoint, the allocation of resources when you're in the act of governing, if you say you want to cut 10% from food stamps, the states with the largest food stamp populations are going to bear an inordinate cost because assuming they have more percentage of or more members that fit into that category. So, but from a raw political perspective, if you're cutting, a cut's a cut. And if the Republicans will come here to raise money in California, but they have no shot of winning California. So that the incentive to protect California, why? Protect the state that voted for them. Structure a plan in a way that promotes the number of states that gets me to the number of elected, electoral college votes. That's a very raw political calculation that I don't think anybody is making at this point. But I do think that for Republicans to say they want to shrink government and lessen regulation, it's very hard to get specific on that question because you can't pull out the Federal Register and talk about. You can't just say I'm going to cut pages 27 through 48. It's going to take some effort to do it, but also it's easier said than done because no one has really been able to cut. It's only, by the way, only in Washington is a spending increase that is less than the projected rate of inflation called a cut. So you get more money, but it's not what you were expecting. Therefore, it's a cut in Washington D.C. terminology, which is a joke in and of itself.
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, sure. It was actually more just a comment, actually. So I actually did look up the stats on the states with the most government assistance, and it looks like 8 out of 10 of them are actually states that voted for Romney. So just confirming that, because we know whether blue states are actually getting more government assistance.
One final question.
Well, I'm Jonathan Gunn. I'm an economics major. It looks as though the Chinese economy is collapsing. Perhaps that could affect the United States in the future. Do you think which party think will have the most benefit from, say, financial collapse in the United States?
We'll have the most.
Like which party will either Republicans or Democrats will benefit the most in terms of like polling from say like a financial collapse?
I think the Republicans would, because people would say Obama's been responsible for the economy for the last 6 years. Just like in 2008, when the economy collapsed under George W. Bush, and you had McCain saying the fundamentals of the economy are sound, President Obama clearly benefited, he got into office on that. So I think if it collapses in the next year, then whichever the Republican nominee is will really benefit.
All right, well, this almost concludes our first political lunch roundtable discussion. And I hope all of you found it as interesting as I did. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to thank both our panelists and our student moderators. Before I do, though, just a couple of quick announcements. Number one, if you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up for our text updates. You ought to have a note on or near your chairs letting you know how to sign up, and that way we can let you know about upcoming events as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Speaking of upcoming events, 1 week from today in this room, we'll be going back, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be alternating over the course of the semester between this roundtable format and our Students Talk Back format with a 4-person panel. In any case, with the other format next week, we'll be talking about the agreement, the nuclear arms agreement between the United States and Iran. And we've put together a terrific panel, both of off-campus experts and student analysts, to lend their insights into that conversation. So we hope you'll join us a week from today to talk about the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. Also, although the deadline has passed for 4-credit political internships, for anyone who might still be interested in interning this semester, there are internships available that we have to provide at City Hall for members of the City Council, as well for a number of other campaigns and nonprofit and advocacy organizations. So if you have an interest in interning this semester, by all means, come see Tanya Mercado. Where's Tanya? Come see Tanya Mercado in our office in VKC 263. Now, if you'll join me in thanking both Seema Mehta and Matt Klink for leading us to the meeting. Let's thank Jenny D. and Sean Wren and the entire team over at the Political Student Assembly for the great work they do in helping us. And also, let's thank the Unruh Institute team. Let's thank Tanya. Let's thank Kat Shea. Let's thank Erica. Let's thank Allie. And let's thank Alyssa for the terrific work they do in putting together these events. And finally, thanks to all of you for attending. We hope we'll see you here next week for our discussion on the Iran-U.S. nuclear deal and for future programming, both at Wednesday lunches and on weekday evenings through the rest of the semester. Thanks very much.